Welcome to the Tax Roundtable.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tax Roundtable with Lee Wilson, managing attorney at the Wilson firm. Lee's board certified in tax law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization and helps individuals and businesses navigate tax controversies, tax planning, and other complex tax matters. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today Lee and I are talking about IRS audits, what happens if you're selected for one, and the mistakes you should avoid that are pretty common out there. Hi, Lee. How are you?
Good, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you. And given that this is the inaugural podcast of the Tax Roundtable, why don't you tell folks who are listening a little bit about yourself, how you got into this particular practice area?
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, let's see. It's been a while now, but going back, I finished my Master's of Tax Law at the University of Florida in 2008. 2008, if anyone here remembers, was a bit of a tough market for new graduates of pretty much anything. And so I took while it wasn't something I was interested in, I really was focused on doing or trying to get into. The job I was offered was a M&A job up in New York. So I started off there. I worked there for a couple of years doing mergers and acquisitions, exciting stuff like that. But what I always wanted to do was kind of what I focus on now, which was controversy. So as soon as a job opened up back here in Texas, I took the opportunity to come down here and get involved in it. And I've been doing that ever since. And so that was 2000 and I guess late 2009. So I've been doing tax controversies, and my focus has primarily been that since 2009. So I guess we're over 17 years, about 17 years now. So that's kind of how I got into it, and really have enjoyed the heck out of it.
Oh, that's great. Great. 17 years. I mean, you've seen a lot of stuff. And I know this first episode, I don't want to say basic, but the IRS audit affects individuals, businesses, all of it. Let's start with just what, in your experience, is the sort of most common reasons that the IRS decides to audit a tax return? Is it random, or are there flags popping up to flag them?
Yeah, well, the answer to your question is a classic lawyer answer is it depends, right? And it really does. So the IRS publishes this great thing every summer. It's called the Data Book, and the Data Book gives you a ton of data on IRS collections and audits, and just really a lot about the inner workings of how what they do works in practice. And so I can tell you, like the most recent Data Book that came out.
I was going to ask you, has this summer's Data Book, it's out now?
No, we're still waiting for the 26, but according to the 25, we had about a 500,000 audits that were closed in 2020 during the 2024 to 2025 year. That's summer to summer, and so but they'll tell you in that kind of how they conduct it, and they conduct about, let's call it 5,000, to answer your question, about 5,000 random audits a year. And they use AI now, data analytics, all kinds of things. And they do that. That's how they build out a lot of their data that they use to then plug into their algorithms to then figure out who they need to audit, if that makes sense. So a lot of that's their test cases. So you could be one of those test cases and you don't know it. But if you get audited either way, you might get adjusted. You might owe more tax or less. Yep. But that's kind of how it goes. And then they use a lot of that data and in their proprietary algorithms and all that to select taxpayers who maybe the income, what is being reported on the return doesn't really jive with what third parties have reported they've paid that particular taxpayer, whether it's a company or a person, or the IRS's scoring system of returns. They assign what's called a diff score, and that will flag a return if the expenses seem a little bit off relative to the type of company, the revenue, the geography, all that. So there's all sorts of ways. They use all sorts of tools.
Yeah, and they're just, given the conversation around AI and its reliance on huge amounts of data, the IRS obviously is a treasure trove of data. So it's interesting how they quite simply could identify like, oh, this is out of the norm, right? And sort of
Right.
it may be the best application of AI for the IRS, for better or worse for the consumer. So
Sure.
what? Okay, let's say that I receive an IRS audit notice tomorrow. I hate to even have put that out there. What should I expect over the days and weeks that follow? Are they going to follow up with me?
Yeah, yeah. So here's what I would tell anybody, right, when the moment they get that first letter. So it starts off something to the effect of your tax return for the above referenced year has been selected for examination, right? Terrifying words to read. No one wants to deal with it. They're scared. I can't tell you how many times I've had that letter walk into my office for a brand new prospective client.
Yeah.
And they have the same question that you just asked, right, Sean? And it's an obvious question because they're scared. But what I would tell you is this: what you can expect is, that the first letter is going to set up an initial exam like interview, whether it's in a field audit whether it's in person or over the phone if it's a correspondence audit, and I can talk about that later if need be. But clearly, and that's where it kind of kicks off. And at that initial conference is when you and or your representative, whether it's an attorney or a CPA, or you individually, will set sort of the expected timeline for the audit, what kind of questions it's going to involve, what kind of information they're going to want. And that's where it all kind of kicks off. They're going to set what they call an expected completion date, right? They have a target date, and that's just preliminary, and obviously it could change, but they kind of give you that as a guideline. Hey, we think this audit, from what we know now, might take 3 months. So we have a commitment date of this day. But that can change, as they ask for more information, which they usually do. Throughout the course of the audit, they're going to issue what are called information document requests periodically, and that'll be just them asking for information on top of information, and it really just depends on what you've produced. So that's kind of the process, and how long it's going to take really depends on the focus and what information you give them, and what issues they're looking at. We've had audits run a few months, to a few years.
Wow.
It really depends. Yeah.
And what about as we sort of open this podcast up with what mistakes are you seeing people make when after they find out they're being audited?
Well, I think the biggest mistake is really the biggest mistake I see people make is that they don't come and consult a professional before they start engaging in conversation with the government. And what that commonly results in is them saying things they probably shouldn't, and somewhat effectively locking themselves into positions by their words that weren't a wise thing to do. A classic thing would be, this happens a lot, is telling the examiner or the auditor in that first initial conversation or interview that they don't have records of something, or they didn't do something, or this or that, and as it turns, or making affirmative statements that are incorrect because they were scared of their real answer and they didn't know what to do. And then they come to us, and we've got to sort of deal with that. We've got to find a way to sort of dress that back up, and without it making it look like the client lied or
Right.
whatever, or misrepresented the truth, if you want to say it that way,
Yeah.
and then go from there. So that puts us in a bit behind the eight ball, so to speak, if that happens. So that's what I think the biggest mistake people make is, and when I say that, I mean they don't necessarily have to come to a firm like ours and hire us, but I think it would behoove them to come and sit down for an hour consultation, kind of, paint them a picture of what they can expect and how they need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, and it could be an honest error in in what I filed, I suppose, right? Like there is oh, okay, yeah, I left that out. Whoops. Here you go. You mentioned that some of these happen in person, some of them happen over the telephone, or maybe even over Zoom. Are there different types of audits that taxpayers should know about?
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mentioned before from the data book, right, that about 500,000 audits were conducted in that last year based on the information we have. Most of those, about close to a little under 400,000 of those, were personal audits. So that's one type. And then the majority of those are going to be correspondence audits, right? You're not going to ever meet the examiner in person. But the balance of those are corporate audits. When I say corporate, I mean corporations, partnerships, S corporations, business-related returns, right? And a greater percentage of those are going to be field audits, and that means you're meeting the examiner in person. They're in your office if you have a business, et cetera, et cetera. So what I would tell someone is, depending on the type of audit it is, if it's a field audit, then it's way more likely that it's going to take longer and they're going to be asking for more information. So you need to be prepared for that. If it's correspondence, it's more likely to be a little bit slimmer focus, so to speak. And they're going to be focused on just specific issues. And so usually the timetable on an audit like that, you can expect it to be less, and you can expect, because you can expect to be asked to turn over less information. So that's kind of how I would simply break it down for people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm curious if I and I have, in fact, received a letter from the IRS regarding tax year 2021. You owe us additional money. Is that was I audited, so to speak, or was that just a simple systematic calculation of something?
No, it's a good question, right? And so usually those letters are a result, really entirely computer generated notices, and they're a result of the matching system recognizing that what went on to your return didn't quite match with all the 1099s or W-2s or what have you.
Yeah, all the other data they got.
Yeah, that were issued to you, right? Because the whole thing is built on, a matching system and when it doesn't match, the computer recognizes that and will send you that letter. So, and that one is typically just a math calculation, or they'll call it a math error, and it does not count as an audit. So that return could still be audited, if it was within the statute of limitations and whatnot.
Yeah, math error. That's right in my wheelhouse.
Computation error, right?
Yeah, exactly. Given your 15 plus years of doing this, Lee, do you have an example in your case book, so to speak, of an audit that or getting the right guidance really made a meaningful difference for a client that they walked in there, or maybe they were already working with you, but that you helped someone out in that way?
Yeah, so I can think of countless ones. I mean, when you do it that long, we've had a lot under our belt, and they come in all shapes and sizes. But one in particular, I think that sits with me, that I remember that I have a lot of, we as a firm got a lot of satisfaction from, was we had a client who owns an HVAC company, and essentially, she was under audit and in the middle of a divorce at the same time, and so it was kind of a mess. But the bottom line is, she came to us and she was already under audit, and she was really confused, and she had a really tough auditor who was really disallowing everything. And it was really, the focus of the audit was an employment audit. So it was, it was trying to reclassify the people that did work for her as employees rather than 1099 contractors.
Oh, yeah. Common.
Can be a very, very big difference, and can essentially be a business killer. And that's what it was in this case. And so, long story short, we had to go through complete the audit, and we had to appeal the result through what's called a protest. And when we did that, it took a long time, but when we finally got the resolution, that we were hoping for, it saved her business. She was going to have to shut down. She couldn't afford to pay the bill. We saved her over $1 million in additional tax liability for those 3 years that the IRS had taken the position at exam that these people were employees and not contractors. So we spent a lot of time and effort getting that, and it was great and really, really satisfying when we got that result. And she, we called her and told her, and it was just, I'll never forget her reaction, because we all knew that was everything hinged on this happening and going our way. That's one.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example. And I hear in that too that, you didn't say this, but you had a hard ass auditor. It does sometimes come down to personality. I speak with a lot of attorneys during the week, and there's the law, there's the written law, there's the judicial system, but then, there's the judge on the bench, there's the auditor across the table that, that really can influence the direction stuff goes.
Totally. Yeah. The human element, right? There's a human element in everything. So who you get, what side of the bed they woke up on that day, all those things come into play and when you're dealing with the IRS. They really do. So you have to have sort of there's some soft skills involved if you're if you're the attorney representing the client, and kind of knowing, reading the room, so to speak, taking the temperature and feeling like, figuring out what approach is going to work best here, and when is the right time to pull out pull out a backup plan or whatever, right? All those things come into play.
Yeah. Personally, I mean, I've actually, there is this whole like, oh my God, IRS. I've actually found them quite easy to deal with, at the level I've been working with them at. It's like, oh yeah, I'm in it. I can't do this, or like the people generally are pretty helpful. Just people. Listen, Lee, just a couple minutes left, and I want to give you an opportunity here just to, to tell listeners, someone's out there, maybe they just got a letter, an IRS audit notice. What's the one or two things that you'd want them to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I would say, if I could stress anything at all, it would be kind of what I said earlier. I would say the moment you get that notice, don't resist the temptation to, call that auditor back immediately and find out what's going on. Call a tax attorney in your area. Or, I mean, if it's the IRS, really doesn't matter where they are, to be honest with you, it's federal. So we handle cases from all over the country. But what I would stress is resist the urge to call them back. Call a tax lawyer that you trust, or that you find that you think you can trust, and sit down and have a consultation with them, and go over your rights, your responsibilities, kind of what to expect. And I think that is what I would tell everyone, is that it can be an invaluable step for a minimal amount of time and money to really figure out kind of where you are. And, until you do that, I don't think it's worth, getting too worried or scared. People spend a lot of time, when they come into our office, they're terrified. But until you talk to your attorney and they kind of advise you on where you sit, there's no sense in getting too worked up. Just sit down with a professional, just like you would go to a doctor if you had some symptoms of something and you weren't sure about. Don't get on WebMD and start reading the worst possible result. Same thing here. Don't go scare yourself into oblivion online by looking at what the worst case scenario is.
Yeah, step away from the internet. Step away from the internet. That is great. That don't panic. I mean, this is the thing too, and even like with my CPA, it's like you guys, you speak this language. You're playing in this game every day, and for the average consumer, it's like, oh, I don't know what this means. And it's like, well, of course you don't.
Right.
Don't panic, right? Call a professional. I love that. Lee, thank you. We're up against time. That's what happens. Super interesting. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your point of view. And I look forward to future episodes.
Likewise. Thank you, Sean. I much appreciated. It was my pleasure.
You bet. That's it for this episode, the inaugural episode of the Tax Roundtable. If you found this episode helpful and you'd like to learn more about IRS audits or other tax issues, you can visit Lee's website, thewilsonfirmpllc.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time for more practical conversations about tax law.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.